Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with us this evening for, I am told, the fourth time since we've started the show, is State Representative Tami Gouveia, or should I say, Dr. Tami Gouveia. Tami has recently achieved her doctorate in public health, which is quite an accomplishment. I have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody who goes through any kind of an academic program like that, especially if you're working full-time and you're trying to manage a family and do all these other things that you're doing. So that's just a tremendous accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I'm also told by our producer, Vilu, who keeps these records, because I certainly don't keep the records, that this is our 50th Chasing the Facts show. And so I just think it's wonderful that Tami is, because 50 is a significant number, you know, as an anniversary number. And she is with us on our 50th show. To remind folks, Tami also did our inaugural show. She was the first guest, so I think this is very special. So it's funny how things like that kind of happen.
It is. I feel sad, though. I would have brought a gift, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, I told Vilo, I said if I'd known, we would have had a cake or cupcakes or cookies or something, but I guess, although being in a school, I'm not sure we can do that, so maybe there's a rule against that. But anyway, we are very, very glad to have you back, and you are the one of 4 state representatives for Chelmsford, and you represent parts of Acton and all of Concord. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so it's all of Concord, a few precincts in Acton, and then precincts 1 and 9 in Chelmsford. And I have to
Carlisle,
say,
too.
And let's not forget our friends in that wonderful town of Carlisle.
Yes.
What do you happen to know what the population of Carlisle is off the
Not off the top of my head.
It can't be more than 4 or 5,000.
I think it's around 3.
Is it around 3?
Yeah,
okay.
It's just, yeah.
It never.
Lovely
I think
town.
it was around when I was in high school in the early '60s. It was around just under 2, I think. So it hasn't grown much.
Not tremendously. Yeah.
But anyway, so that's your district, and you're in your
3rd year, my
3rd
second term.
That's right, because you've run twice. That's right.
Correct.
I remember.
Yes.
And you had to beat off the opposition with a stick both times, right?
Well, ish. First time, yes. Second time, I benefited from incumbency, I suppose.
Right.
And it was tough for folks who were running races in the middle of the pandemic. So,
Oh, I can imagine the campaigning.
very different.
Such as it was, very hard, very hard to do. But since we are talking about districts and the fact that Chelmsford, as everybody knows, they've heard it ad nauseum from me and probably every public official in the town for the last 20 years, we have 4 state reps, which is very unusual. Probably not unusual for a town our size to have 2.
Right.
And maybe even 3, but 4 is kind of a stretch, and that was a result of the redistricting that was done as a result of the 2000 census. So now we have the 2020 census that's done. And Chelmsford has picked up somewhere between 500 and 600 people in terms of population, and I'm sure that I wouldn't be surprised if Acton and Concord hadn't picked up some as well.
Correct.
So there will be a redistricting, and we're very concerned about that in town. Locally, we're going to go from 9 precincts probably to 11. So that's going to be the impact that we have locally. But as far as our state presence is concerned, do you have any inkling at this point as to how the census numbers are going to impact the redistricting and whether or not Chelmsford will continue with 4, get down to 3, or maybe even 2. Any insight there?
I don't have any insights about how the district might change in terms of the number of representatives that it has. However, I know that this has been something that I have heard about since I was first elected, just the desire by many residents to reduce the number of representatives. There are some people who do believe that having 4 is a benefit to the town. I think you can look at it from both perspectives. But I have advocated with the chairman of redistricting to, try to reduce the number of representatives that Chelmsford has, just because I hear the desire to reduce the number over and over again by my constituents in the 1st and 9th precincts. The population has shifted to the eastern part of the state and from Western Mass, and also from the south to the north towards Boston. So there's going to be ripple effects across the state in terms of redistricting. What we're told is that we need to know what the districts look like a year before next year's general election, because candidates need to live in the district that they're running to represent. So we anticipate seeing something pretty soon that will come back to the state legislature, and something that we'll be taking up, I would imagine, towards the end of October, maybe even the middle of October if we're lucky. The chair has been working really hard with the committee, getting out across the whole state to hear what people's ideas are and what their desires are for the kind of districts that they would like to have drawn, and who they would, hope to, sort of be working with, kind of thing. So it's hard to know if we will actually be successful in reducing Chelmsford's number of representatives from 4 to 3 or even 2, but the case has been made on numerous occasions. Also, I worked with, last legislative session, I brought the chair of redistricting to Chelmsford, and his name is Paul Mark, and we were I think we were over at the Arts Center for a session with residents coming, and also at that time expressing their views on what they would hope the district might look like. So been numerous opportunities to make sure that the residents of Chelmsford have their voice heard as it comes to redistricting.
Well, that's I'll tell you, that's very encouraging, and probably that is something that did not happen 20 years ago. I'm going to guess, or at least did not happen to the extent that it's happening now, because the select board has told me. I indicated to them that I was going to have you on the show, and I asked, if they had anything that they would like brought up. And this is, I think, probably the high point with them is the redistricting, and they've actually submitted testimony to the committee, I believe, and said what the preference is, as far as they're concerned. And they would like, obviously, something that makes geographical sense, I think. They're talking about, apparently they requested some alignment with the North Middlesex Council of Governments, so that suggests to me that they're thinking geographically, which I think, for those people who do not understand legislative districts and the way the lines are drawn and the political implications, I think most of us look at it and say, well, why does the district look like this when it ought to look like this,
Yeah.
Just basic logic, So I think that's what they're looking for.
Absolutely.
Do you just gut feel? I know you don't have any specific information, but do you think it might be likely that we would go from 4 to 3?
It's really hard to know. I mean, I feel like we have been making the case for the last 3 years, both we meaning myself as well as the local residents, local leaders. So hopefully the legislature will be able to accommodate those desires. I think that the thing that's difficult is, the districts need to be a certain number of size in terms of population, plus or minus, I think it's 5%. So, some districts can have a few more residents than the neighboring district, and that might help with some of the geographic considerations, but it's just difficult, just given, how different communities, what their population size is. And, we know that some of our, communities in the area they've really grown over the last 20 years, right? Like, look at Westford. They've really been growing over the last 20 years. So that's right next door. That might have some implications for, how the districts might get
And I
redrawn.
believe Lowell picked up some population too. So that should, but as you said, that whole shift statewide from Worcester eastward apparently is where the shift has taken place. So the western part of the state has lost population, and I don't know if it's enough to affect our congressional districting.
It will, is my
Yeah.
understanding from the chairman, is that there will be some impacts. It doesn't impact the number that we have. We'll still have the 9.
Right.
But just for your viewers to understand that. But the districts will look different. And there's a potential that we will see some competitive races between incumbents that are not at the congressional level, but
Right.
within the House of Representatives in particular. There may be, a couple seats that folks have to run against each other just because of the ways that the lines need to get redrawn.
Yeah.
So
That's always tough. If you've had a seat for 15 or 20 years, and you're well established, and I mean, not to say that you own it, or
right.
but it is tough, especially if you've been an effective representative and you've done a good job and your constituency likes you.
Exactly.
But that's politics. That's the game. Right?
That's how it goes. Yeah.
And you
it
know
is.
that when you get into it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, well, that's we're going to be encouraged, and we're going to hope that it.
I like to be an optimist, but
Well,
I
I
also
think
don't want
so.
to raise any hopes or expectations.
But what was good to hear you just say is the fact that it does appear that the folks in the State House are listening. And again, I'm not so sure that that was fully the case 20 years ago. And I think,
Right.
but again, people are more aware than they were 20 years ago.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's good news. Another issue that has us concerned locally. Well, before we get into that, let's talk a little about COVID, because, and I know people are probably sick to death of that, but the COVID situation in Massachusetts apparently is a little bit different than it is in other parts of the country, and this should be right up your alley as a public health person. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the response that the state has given in terms of the mandates or suggestions, or as to how people should behave and act, and maybe talk a little about the numbers in terms of vaccinations and so forth. So if you want to
Sure.
just amplify that a little
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things, right? I think that we're very lucky in Massachusetts that we do have a highly educated population. And along with having a population that is so highly educated, paying attention to the news, really believes in science and what the numbers tell us. So we've had, from the beginning, once the vaccine became available, people really clamoring to go get their vaccinations. And that's really been to a benefit to our state as a whole. We know we haven't gotten to herd immunity. We know that our kiddos still cannot get vaccinated, so that contributes to the fact that we haven't been able to get to herd immunity.
bit. Is there a percentage for that? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, they prefer to not give like an actual hard and fast
that makes
rule
sense.
around percentage. But in some communities, we're still only at 50% vaccination. And that puts all of us at risk, right? And it also puts us at risk if other parts of the country or other parts of the world are not also vaccinated, because of the ways that this virus travels and the ways that it mutates. And now we have, the variants that we're contending with as well. So much of this is pretty predictable in terms of how viruses behave, that they would mutate and turn into variants, that, we knew that we would have the possibility of there being breakthrough cases, and that for some folks, immunocompromised folks in particular, that the vaccine might not take in the same way that it does in someone who does not have any immune deficiencies.
Well, I don't think any vaccine is 100% effective.
Of course, right. And the whole point is that, the vaccine, it helps reduce how sick people get if they do get exposed to COVID, and reduces hospitalizations, which from a public health and a health systems management perspective is really critically important, right? So we're very lucky here in Massachusetts that our vaccination rates are higher than on average compared to a lot of other states. I still firmly believe we're not doing nearly enough around testing. I believe that we should be providing free rapid antigen testing. I know in my own family, I've had to go out and pay the $30, $40 for my older son, who is an essential worker, for him to be able to go back to work after taking a couple of days off because he didn't feel good, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't COVID. PCR tests, they can take a couple of days to actually get the appointment and then get the results back. Other states are doing this where you can go to the local library, go get a free rapid antigen test, take it at home, and then you know whether or not you are infectious for COVID. And so that allows you as an individual to make the decision and to be empowered to make the decision whether or not you go into the office that day, or you go to the grocery store, or you go to a busy mall, or any other myriad activity. So I think there's more that we could be doing in addition to the vaccinations and wearing our masks, to prevent the spread of COVID and those more contagious variants.
You just brought up a very interesting point, because what we hear a lot of people say, well, they talk about mandates and how people are uncomfortable with mandates and so forth, and people say that they want to be responsible, and they want to act responsibly. And I say, well, I agree with that. However, in order for you to act responsibly, you have to know what your situation is. So the free testing or the availability of testing within that context makes perfect sense. So if you can go down to the corner drugstore on no notice and blow in there and get a test and find out then you're in a position to act responsibly.
Exactly.
Okay? And we can debate whether that means masks or whatever, but at least you have the knowledge. Exactly. So I think your point is very well taken. So why is it that we don't do that in Massachusetts? Do we know?
I don't know. I've been advocating for it basically since the beginning of 2021. I started meeting with infectious disease experts and testing experts late in 2020. Because I was sort of seeing that this is an opportunity, this is a tool in our toolbox, along with all the other things that we're doing, to be able to open our businesses, keep them open safely, keep our schools open safely. So I filed legislation on this, had letters that I've sent to the governor and the House and Senate leadership, advocating for the use of federal dollars. We can use federal dollars to support this kind of a testing approach. They have done this in other countries. I was just speaking with a friend of mine who is in the UK, and what she said is that it allowed their college students to be able to have some semblance of normalcy, go to their internships, go to their classes, and they did it by taking rapid antigen testing, and they rotated. So this cohort took the test on Monday, this cohort took it on Tuesday, this cohort took it on Wednesday, and so on and so forth. So they had a good handle on it throughout the week, the number of students who might be walking around infectious. And then they're taken out of circulation so that then they're not walking around exposing other people. Because this Delta variant, exposes or can spread to 6 to 9 individuals. The original form, the wild form of the virus was only, 1.5 to 2.5 people that it was spreading to. So the fact that, other countries and other localities in our own country are trying to get a handle on it through more effective kind of testing, I think, is the direction we should be moving in and really paying attention to as a Commonwealth.
Is it anyway a political problem, or is it a bureaucratic problem?
It's political. In the beginning, the Department of Public Health was really pushing and saying that rapid antigen tests weren't worth anything. In part, the technology in the beginning wasn't on par with PCR tests, but the Department of Public Health has done their own studies that have looked at whether or not rapid antigen tests are picking up COVID infectiousness at the same rate as PCR, and they're finding that they really are. They're validation studies that our own DPH has done. So now they've changed their tune, but with anything, you tell human beings, don't do X, Y, Z, don't do X, Y, Z, and then all of a sudden you say X, Y, Z is actually the better way to go. It's hard for people to trust that and to change that and to get that message. So that's a big part of it. And then, of course, the funding for it as well.
But folks, anyone who's listening to the show, we have an expert here on this subject. We started off the show by telling folks that we have a doctor of public health. So I'm certainly going to listen to you, because this is an area that I don't know anything about. And, I have to be guided, like most people, by common sense. But I listen to the experts until the experts do something to prove that we shouldn't listen to them. I think you always have to give people the benefit of the doubt. You can't start off in an area that you don't know anything about, you can't start off being skeptical and negative, because again, you don't know. I don't know, and I admit it. So I listen to people like you, and that's very valuable. Now, I'm told that we have the potential as a state of receiving upwards of, I don't know, a couple $2 billion in terms of COVID relief funding. Now, when we get that, what's going to happen? What are we going to do with that?
Well, the legislature has been hosting a series of hearings and meetings to, really hear from different constituencies on where the funding really is most needed, where might it be the most effective, where might we be able to, make some key investments given this one-time or so infusion of, pretty big numbers of dollars coming into the state. And so I know I see my inbox flooded from advocates all across the state, all across different kinds of issues. Housing is a really big push. Climate change is a really big push. Making sure that we are shoring up and supporting our social safety net is also really being pushed as well. Just making sure that we are not leaving anybody behind, I think, is going to be really critical as we work to get on to the other side of this pandemic, which we know that it's not behind us yet. We're still, learning to live with this virus. I think we will be for a little while. So I think it's important to be judicious in how we're spending this money, and I'm grateful that we're doing that in the legislature. And it does sound like there are ways that the Baker administration and the leadership is now kind of working together on where does that funding go. Yeah, that was the latest, because I think the governor realized that the House and Senate leadership was not really going to give up their responsibility and their ability to take the first pass at how that money gets spent. Just like all other budget, goes through the House and the Senate.
Well, that's
first.
the legislative process.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, you can't really argue with that.
Exactly.
The trick is at the end to work together, and affect whatever compromises you can. And some governors are pretty good at that, and some are not so good at it, and we've seen that in the state. So, well, that's all very, very good information. Now, I'm going to quickly ask you one more question, then we're going to get on to your run for lieutenant governor.
Okay,
people
sounds
are
great.
interested in that. PFAS.
Yeah.
Quickly, any information coming from the state in terms of potential remediation funds or anything like that?
There is a commission and a series of meetings that are happening. This is being actively talked about. I'm not sure if there's specifically remediation dollars, but we know that it's community after community after community that is being impacted by these forever chemicals.
Right.
It's actually how I started my degree in public health, was through environmental health policy. So this is something that is really serious, and it's something that unfortunately in our state and in our country, we allow manufacturers of all different kinds of products and chemicals to just go ahead and make those chemicals and make those products without necessarily proving that they are not going to have environmental consequences down the line. And so I think we're sort of experiencing the consequences of that kind of approach, whereas in other countries, they have what's called the precautionary principle. Companies have to prove that their product is not going to be damaging to the environment or to human health. So we need to switch that here.
It ought to be the same standard that we apply for FDA drugs. You have to prove that it's not only effective, but you have to prove that it's safe.
Exactly.
So if we do
long-term safety too, not just like a finite window, but really long-term. And so now we're living with that with PFAS, because it's in just so many. I mean, popcorn, microwave popcorn
it's just
file,
it's pervasive and it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the future for Dr. Tami Gouveia. You announced, and I'll have to admit I was kind of surprised when you announced that you were going to run for lieutenant governor, especially given the fact that we don't know who was going to be the candidate for the Democratic. So it's kind of unusual for the second person to come out and say, hey, I'm running for lieutenant governor. So let's talk a little about that. What motivated that decision, and what do you see in the future?
Yeah, so much of what motivated it is really watching how we've responded to this pandemic, but also just I'm 47, watching over the last, 3 or so decades, how our social safety net has been eroded, how income inequality has really grown even in our state. You know, Massachusetts is becoming one of those states that it's really hard to achieve upward mobility. And so just really paying attention to that and paying attention to the fact that we don't put the health and well-being of all of our residents at the center of how we make decisions. We make things incredibly difficult for people to access the resources they need. And given my background as a public health social worker for the last 25 years, I just thought, you know what, I can take my skills, I can take my experiences having grown up in Lowell, I can take my experiences at some point along the last 10 years. I was a single parent and just had a lot of the financial struggles that a lot of families had before the pandemic and are now experiencing through this pandemic. I've lived that. And so wanting to take all of that and bring that to my role as the next lieutenant governor for the state. The other thing is I talk to colleagues of mine in public health. I talk to local leaders, select board members, school committee members, and so many of them feel really dejected and kicked in the teeth in terms of the ways that we've responded to this pandemic. You know, putting the onus on whether or not our schools should have mask mandates to the local level. It sounds great on paper, you know, local control. I'm for local control. But you could have predicted, any leader could have predicted that what that would entail is neighbor being pitted against neighbor. And we saw that in community after community in our state. And that's just unconscionable. That's really unfair. These are folks who volunteer their time to improve their kids' school, to make sure their kids have the resources that they need. If they're a business person who's on a school committee, they want to make sure that the educational opportunities available to the residents in that community are as best as they can be, because they know ultimately they'll end up with really good employees later on down the line. So, you know, just to put the onus onto, you know, volunteers. And so I think it's really important that we have someone in the corner office who understands what those challenges have really been like and felt like for our local leaders, and how to re-engender trust between state government and the corner office and people all across their state who are serving in these very critical roles at the local level. So
I'll tell you, that's quite a summary of and it certainly indicates that you've given this an awful lot of thought. It also sounds to me like you envision the role of lieutenant governor to be something a little bit different than it is currently. So it sounds like you are thinking of a more active role. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, and just give us your thoughts on that. And if you are successful in that, how would you go about designing that particular office to fit that?
Yeah, I see tremendous opportunities with the role of lieutenant governor to be a partner to the governor in solving the complex problems that we face right now. It's time for everybody to roll up their sleeves and be part of and pull up a chair to the decision-making table, and I've done that as a public health social worker. I've already started to reach out and build relationships with each of the gubernatorial candidates who have declared, because we don't know who the next governor could be, and so it's really important to start some of that groundwork now. I've already been out across the state. We'll continue to do that. In fact, I declared early because I knew that I would have a finite window of being able to be in person. Being a politician, a local leader, it's really important to be to have FaceTime with folks in person. I was predicting, given COVID and given what's happened with viruses like this and pandemics in the past, that we could have the potential of reverting back to virtual. And we're already starting to see that, where people are starting to pivot and have virtual meetings rather than in person. So just really starting to already do the work of serving as a partner with the governor. I formed coalitions and partnerships, bringing unique, different perspectives to the table. That's what we need to get us through the pandemic and on to the other side. It's what we also need to get through our housing crisis, our climate crisis, the challenges that we face with transportation, and just so many other issues that our state and so many other states are facing as well.
I know if I were governor, I would want, as a number 2 person, I would want somebody strong and who was every bit as capable as I felt that I would be to take on that responsibility. And I would make sure that that person's plate is full. And I think governors in the past, and in not just Massachusetts, but other states, make that mistake. They let their egos get in the way.
Agree.
All right, and that shouldn't be. So we've got about 30 seconds left, Tammy. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the camera and ask for the vote. Very
Absolutely.
important.
Yes, well, between now and next year, I do hope to earn your support for my run for Lieutenant Governor. I will be working hard every single day to earn your vote, and you can reach out and find out more about me and my race and what I stand for at tamigouveia.com. Thank you.
Very good. And once again, thank you for
Thank
being
you.
a guest on the show.
Of
And we
course.
look forward to your upcoming campaign.